Oh, really? Yeah. All right.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Today's a special day, and then we get to celebrate 240 years ago. It was a significant day in the history of Reading, as it was within the entire region. And we're here to commemorate what happened to Reading during Tyrons' raid on Danbury. I know some here are familiar with the story, so I'll just quickly do a little overview. The fact is that Danbury, during the Revolutionary War, at the early part of the Revolutionary War, was the principal military storage site for the Continental Army, where they kept everything from shoes to tents to barreled pork and barreled beef. And the British knew this, and they decided that they wanted to go to destroy the stores that were there in Danbury. But in order to do so, they had to bring in 1,850 soldiers, primarily British soldiers, but quite a few loyalists as well too. They came up from New York City. They landed at Combo Beach in Westport, at the time it was Fairfield, and disembarked on the 25th of April, 1777. And the word went out within the region that the British were en route to Danbury. The shortest, most expedient way to get there was up what's now Black Rock Turnpike, which dropping right through Reading and Reading Ridge. Over the night of the 25th of April, they camped out south of here in Greenfield Hill area, and then continued marching. And between Greenfield Hill and Reading Ridge here, where we're located, the Reading militia went out in an attempt to try to harass or try to engage the rear guard of the British forces. We don't know exactly how many men there were. We do know that they went down a parallel road that's no longer there, called the Radley Upright Highway, that ran along the east side of the Saugatuck River. And in doing so, they came down and unexpectedly came upon a sortie of British soldiers. There was a small skirmish. However, the Reading militia members were captured. We now know there were 16 to 15 soldiers that were captured. We don't know if they were all captured at that time, but it is believed so. The British forces continued up, and by lunchtime on the 26th of April, the British stopped for lunch here. Eriker's Field is preserved in perpetuity, which it actually served as the training grounds for the Reading East militia. At one time is where the British soldiers stopped for lunch. It's an interesting little story. And if you look behind, you look on top of the Episcopal Church, you'll see a weather vane with a rooster atop. That is a replica of the same weather vane that was there at the time, and it turned out to be part of that by the soldiers. The original rooster is still in the church, and you'll have an opportunity after the ceremony if you want to see it. So Well, the British stopped here in Reading. It was the opportunity for a few loyalists in Reading to join the ranks with the British. The loyalists in Reading had a hard go of it. Reading, for the most part, at that time, was back in the Patriot cause, as were the selectmen in town. And when we look and see the two of the militia members that were captured, actually two of them were two of the three selectmen in town. We have Stephen Betts, who actually, this went on to become his house, who was also a tavern owner, as well as James Rogers, were both captured on that day. We'll continue a little bit more of the story in a minute, but first I'd like to introduce Reverend Dean Ahlberg of the First Church Congregational here in Reading. And he'll talk a little bit about the fact that most of these members who were captured in the militia were members of the Congregational Church. We always got to keep in mind the division within this town between the Patriots and the Loyalists was also a religious faction within town. The Patriots were associated with the Congregational Church. The Loyalists were associated with this church, the Episcopal Church at the time. So thank you.
Well, I want to begin with a word of thanks to the Reading Historical Society and Charley Couch for the invitation to speak this morning. It's a privilege to do so. I'm here, of course, not only as a proud Reading resident, but also and primarily as representative and spiritual descendant of that notorious revolutionary collection of wigs in Reading Center, the Congregational Church. And as such, I think it appropriate to also thank Marilyn Anderson for her cordial welcome to Reading Ridge, where once upon a time, as an embedded musket ball in Christ Church testifies, us wigs didn't always behave ourselves. Thank goodness not all Congregationalists were excellent marksmen. So let it be known and celebrated that our two great traditions have buried the musket, so to speak, though I confess a certain mischievous pleasure in noting that the good parishioners of the Loyalist congregation have, over the years, seen the light and are now also, I hear, devoted patriots. At the time of General Tryon's raid, the minister of the Congregational Church was Reverend Nathaniel Bartlett, Yale class of 1749. Reverend Bartlett was called to the church at the center in 1753, where he was to serve as pastor until 1810, a remarkable tenure of 57 years, the longest pastorate in our church's history. At 27 years, I hold the second longest pastorate in our church's history, but fear not, I have no aspiration to Reverend Bartlett's record. But I begin with Nathaniel Bartlett because he no doubt had an enormous, probably an incalculable impact on the lives of those whom we commemorate this morning. By 1777, Reverend Bartlett had already completed 24 years of ministry to our community, divided as it may have been in those days between Tories and Whigs. And so he was well positioned to be a trusted leader and a voice of inspiration, wisdom, and strength with respect to the most important issues facing the colony: independence from Britain and the revolution that would give birth to liberty. On that issue, Reverend Bartlett was crystal clear. Historians record that he was, quote, an ardent, earnest, and fearless patriot. Yet he had reason to fear. Reading's Tories frequently, I'm told, threatened his life, and accordingly he made his parish visits with a loaded musket in hand. I don't do that anymore. Those visits, those pastoral calls were made, no doubt, on multiple occasions to the men named on this marker. They were his flock, his people. A quick perusal of our church record reveals just how intimate Bartlett's association was with these captured men and their families. He baptized several of them, including Thomas Couch, Charley's ancestor, David Fairchild, Jeremiah Sanford, and his own son, Russell Bartlett. He baptized the sons and daughters of Daniel Meeker, Jonas Platt, Stephen Betts, Jabez Frost, James Rogers and Oliver Sanford, Stephen Betts would return from his capture to serve as a deacon of our church. And in 1755, Nathaniel Bartlett baptized the Reading slave named Ned, who was slain by a British officer in the Danbury raid. So better than many, perhaps better than most, Reverend Bartlett would have understood the cost of revolution, the price of freedom. It was a cost he was prepared to pay in a very personal way. He not only led with pulpit oratory, but also with action. He stored munitions for the Connecticut militia in the parsonage basement, served as chaplain to General Israel Putnam's troops during their 1779 encampment in Reading. He held strategy sessions for the Patriot cause in his home. On a Sunday morning shortly after the outbreak of the Revolutionary War, Reverend Bartlett presented his son, Daniel, with a newly ground sword and bid him go and serve. And another son, Russell, is on this marker and listed as a fifer. So it's so appropriate that we have fifers here this morning. And Russell was captured and imprisoned by the British. As a parent, I can't imagine a more sacrificial act than sending one's sons or daughters off to war. But this was not simply a political battle or a response to economic oppression. It was to these men, their families, and their minister a matter of religious conviction. To defend the inalienable rights God had given them, to oppose a ruler they considered a tyrant, and to resist those who would take away people's civil and or religious liberties. Identifying themselves closely with the ancient Israelites under Pharaoh, the cause of liberty became a sacred duty, part and parcel of their covenant with God. In the grand scheme of the Revolutionary War, the raid on Danbury was, I imagine, a relatively small skirmish. But there's nothing small about the sacrifices we remember today. And with this commemoration, the Reading Historical Society wisely reminds us that it's in the cumulative impact of such seemingly small, yet truly heroic moments that liberty is defended and justice is slowly realized. Inspired by the sacrifices of these men and their families, may we rededicate ourselves to that same sacred cause. And in this troubled world of ours, may our own humble deeds promote justice, multiply compassion, safeguard liberty, and increase peace for all God's children. May God bless these souls. May God bless our town. And may God bless America.
Before I bring Reverend Marilyn Anderson up here, I'd just quickly like to point out the fact that as much as we celebrate those who served the Patriot cause here and some of the hardships and sufferings they endured during the Revolutionary War, so let us not forget the loyalists in Reading who had to leave Reading at the end of the war. Not really by choice, through conviction and through their loyalty to the crown throughout the war. The Lyons family and the Morehouse family stand out as two examples, where shortly after they had to make their way to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, as part of the mass exodus of the Royalists that left this country after the war. A number of them had their farms and their properties confiscated during the war. Some of them had to secret themselves in Long Island. But I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I would like to introduce Reverend Anderson here of the Episcopal Church. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you and to add perhaps another viewpoint or just a good embellishment on what we've already heard. Thank you, Dean, for setting a really great stage for us for inviting and us to participate. Just so we get it straight, the Episcopal Church today actually was not the Episcopal Church during the Revolution. We were the Anglican Church, Church of England. So planted here, obviously, as a kind of an outpost, really, in the biggest sense of that word, an outpost of the British Church, and loyal to the king. In those days, the priest in the liturgy of the church would pray for the king. This was just taken as part of what you did. This was that it was a national church, Church of England. You prayed for the leader. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But in 1789, long after the end of the war, that's when we officially incorporated ourselves as the Episcopal Church, no longer the Anglican Church. And our prayer book actually got tweaked at that time so as to take out prayers for the king, but to insert the same kinds of prayers for the leaders of the nation here and our local leaders as well. So it's a very interesting, kind of involved history of how the church here in Reading became what it is today. So, all that being said, I wanted to touch something that's important to me a lot here. I attended college in Williamsburg, Virginia. Graduated from William and Mary. A lot of families go to Williamsburg, and the kids are all hepped up about the tricorner hats, like what you fellas are wearing, and the girls wear their little dresses, their colonial era dresses. You see a lot of very scrubbed and beautiful remembrances of not only the Revolution but also colonial days. All well and good. But I'd like us to remember that war is terrible. Even this war here, right in our own backyard, was filled with suffering, blood, loss, people left grieving, so much death. So maybe we not forget that as we want to remember and maybe even romanticize something that's quaint and fun, that we remember that it is really steeped in great human suffering. All that being said now, as the British did come up, they took several patriots prisoners, absolutely. And you know what happened to them wasn't necessarily the nice thing you do under the Geneva Convention today with prisoners. The British had several ways they would lodge people they were holding. Notably, the prison ships based in New York Harbor, and also something they called sugar houses in New York. Remember, New York was a kind of a big British stronghold. So they would basically pack these captured patriots in together with very poor sanitation, a lot of suffering in these horrible places, a lot of cholera and other diseases going around, and so many of them died from disease. It was terrible. It was terrible. The patriots, for their part, weren't a whole lot better with captured loyalists because there were equal kinds of suffering imposed on prisoners. One of the most notorious places, you may have heard of it, is Newgate Prison. It's in Simsbury, Connecticut, right? You know, about 2 hours away, an hour and a half away, and a beautiful area now. But in those days, that was a copper mine that had become not particularly economically viable, so they turned it into a prison, and they would keep not only captured British, but also local criminals. They would keep them down under the ground in a big cavern that was dark practically all the time, and the same kinds of conditions developed, whereby there was disease, there was horrible, and a lot of death then, and also hardly any sunlight. How awful! So atrocities on both sides. May we not forget that war is not pretty. I'm going to deal with the loyalists now. The loyalists in this area, Reading Ridge, this was kind of where a lot of loyalists were concentrated. A lot of people loyal to the crown. And of course, after the Declaration of Independence in 1776, these loyalists were considered traitors. And so they were under a lot of threat from all kinds of places, right? Absolutely. Did you know that about 15% of the loyalists in the colonies actually left the colonies to find a better life? And many, not all, many went north into Canada. Nova Scotia was like the big, for this area, was kind of a big magnet for many loyalists running for their lives and their livelihoods. And because so many people, about 32,000, went to Nova Scotia, that put this huge strain on Nova Scotia, the colony. And so there was so much discontent that the colony of New Brunswick was set up by the Crown to take a lot of these folks who went up toward Nova Scotia. So a very interesting end to a war whereby the defeated ones, or those under threat, had to flee, including some of ours. Now, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, oh my God, this is so interesting because 230 years ago, here in Redding Ridge, we generated some refugees. We hear this word all the time in the news now, so many refugees. And there's a lot of controversy, a lot of strain put on other comments, we know that. But these very loyal were refugees in their day. So may we remember that, this long ago, this area generated refugees as well. And may it help us with developing our compassion for the other, to recall that we too participated in a pulse of refugee generation those many years back. And I want to end us with a story. Before I get to my story, I'd like to invite you to the church because we have two things in our church that are very interesting to many people who are following the history of it. The first one, as I pointed out, is our weather vane. This is the replica. But remember, on General Tyrons' march, these 1,550 British troops were sitting around in the field, which actually used to be right through the field. We sold it off in the 1800s. Darn. I wish it was still our field. This used to be our field. And they parked here, about 1,500 men. And they were waiting because their leaders were having a powwow with William Heron, who was a big wig here, probably a double agent, who lived right in this house over here, which used to be Hank Sanford's house recently. And so that was his property there. He didn't live in the same house, but I mean on that property. And so these bigwigs, his leaders, were meeting with him, and all the other guys are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Well, somebody said, look at that weather vane. I bet I can hit it. And of course, what's going to happen when you hit a weather vane? Go round and round. It must have been actually very fun. Well, we don't have the original up. This is a replica. The original rooster weather vane lives in our side entrance of the church, right on the other side where this bulge pile is, right in that way. And so you are all very welcome to go in, take a look at the weather vane, and just kind of touch a piece of history. That's pretty cool. The other thing I invite you to come in and see is to enter into the church through that same entrance. And in back of the church, we have a plaque, a brass plaque, that commemorates the day when the Sons of Liberty, kind of like a offshoot guerrilla group, maybe, of the Patriot side, came in and threatened our minister, threatened him. Why? They threatened him because he was giving prayers for the king. And that was extremely offensive. And they told him if he didn't sit down and shut up, they're going to go boom. And Reverend Beach would not back down. God bless him. He was a colorful figure. And he stayed there and he told his people, don't worry, don't be afraid of these people. They don't have any power over you. Only God ultimately has power. Okay. So these guys go boom, and they shoot at Reverend Beach. Luckily he was missed because those guns weren't so hot in those days. And the bullet lodged inside the sounding board. That's the little thing over the pulpit that helps to project the sound out to the church. So the bullet got stuck in there and later got dug out and then a replica of the bullet put in this plaque. So, you're welcome to go in there if you want to see that. It's a very historical building. Back to my north. Just this past Thursday, 2 days ago, I was just back from vacation, and I looked out the window, and here is a couple from, I didn't know where from, but they're walking out, parked the car, walked around to the graveyard, and I saw them out there looking at the
Follow up to what Reverend Anderson had to say, maybe saying the names of those people out loud does have some significance. So I'm going to call out the names of those that we're here to honor today. And upon completion of each name, the Danbury, or the Germantown Ancients, like the drum corps, will acknowledge the drum roll. Thomas Couch. David Fairchild gave his life. Ezekiel Fairchild. Jabez Frost. Daniel Meeker. Timothy Parsons, who had his musket smashed by a British soldier who said, "Ne'er again shall it be pointed at a British soldier." Jonas Clack. Selectman James Rogers. The young Jeremiah Sanford, who was actually 19 years old, not 10 years old as has been recorded in some books. Oliver Sanford. Nathaniel Squire. Ned. Slave whose ultimate freedom by an enemy officer's sword in Danbury represented his ultimate freedom. And new recognition, something in the last 15 years, thanks to contributions by Tad Sanford, we recognize that the fact that Jeremiah Sanford, the 19-year-old, died in prison. His father was also in prison. We did not know that at the time we put this monument here. His father, Daniel Sanford, who returned to Reading and who was made a deputy of Reading to serve in May's session of the General Assembly up in Hartford and tragically died just weeks later on July 5th, 1777, and whose memory we want to acknowledge and put with the rest of the